Breaking news, global temperatures have risen to staggering new heights, reaching a record high of 48 degrees Celsius. This alarming development is just the latest indication of the ongoing climate crisis, as carbon emissions and other greenhouse gases.
3, 2, 1. Climate countdown initiated.
Imagine you leave for work or school. You climb into your sleek electric vehicle. The quiet hum of the electric motor starts and you're off. You speed off, proud that you're in a car that's so good for the planet. When you return home, you see your solar panels soaking in the sunlight. You're thrilled you're so environmentally friendly. You're a little irked you have to take a plane the next day, but how bad could plane emissions really be? Surely everything else you're doing for the climate will compensate. So you might be surprised to learn that green energy isn't always so green. I'm your host, Fraser, and you're listening to the Climate Countdown, the podcast where we talk about our journey to a sustainable future. Today we're talking about renewable energy. Let's jump in to find out how renewable green energy actually is. The well-known climate activist Greta Thunberg recently finished writing a book called, very appropriately, The Climate Book. Although I have not had time to read the whole book, here's what I learned from the one chapter I had time to read about fossil-free energy sources. In high-income countries, CO2 emissions are actually falling. Those of us in high-income countries have reached a comfortable standard of living, and as a result, our energy use has leveled out and in some cases is even falling. As stated by Glenn Peters, author of this chapter, with a complementary mix of technology and behavioral and political changes, we will drive a transformation of society to abide the worst risks of the climate crisis. Not only is there solar and wind power, but there's also green hydrogen power, nuclear power, biomass energy, and geothermal energy, all of which are renewable energy sources. According to a study conducted by the David Suzuki Foundation, titled Clean Power Pathways, we could shift to zero-emission electricity across Canada by 2035. The International Energy Agency declared solar and wind technologies to be proven technologies and our cheapest source in electricity generation in history. Energy efficiency, storage, existing hydroelectricity, and grid connections between provinces deliver flexibility and reliability for pathways of high levels of solar and wind generation. Pathways that rely on renewables, such as wind and solar, are an affordable solution to meet climate targets as well as the growing demand for electricity. They are also comparable or lower than current pathways. Expanding on these technologies should be the foundation to reaching 100% zero-emission electricity across Canada. The labor needs for this transition would be nothing short of significant. However, this serves to open a whole new realm of careers. Job opportunities would include construction, operation, and maintenance. These positions alone would create more than 75,000 jobs annually, which works out to 1.5 million job years between 2025 and 2050. By switching out fossil fuels for clean energy, these pathways support a large amount of annual CO2 emissions reductions, amounting to greater than 27% of the total reductions needed to reach Canada's net zero goals. In order to ensure that renewable energy projects are successful, we would need the collaboration and consent of the Indigenous communities whose unceded traditional territories we would be building infrastructure on. We would also need to ensure that Indigenous communities are given equal access to renewable energy and other benefits. After interviews with Indigenous clean energy leaders, 6 general themes were identified that are essential to guide planning and development of achieving 100% zero emissions electricity across Canada by 2035. The 6 themes are as follows, and I quote, 1. Indigenous worldviews and knowledge need to be incorporated and respected within broader societal and economic value systems. 2. Meaningful rights-based and consent-based consultation needs to become common practice for all clean energy projects. 3. Existing Indigenous leadership needs to be honored and advanced through support for capacity, ownership, opportunities, and jobs. 4. Indigenous leaders require a seat at decision-making tables, as decarbonizing electricity must also mean decolonizing power structures. 5. Solving systemic infrastructure gaps for Indigenous communities through focused, just transition measures must be prioritized as part of the clean energy transition. And finally, 6. Economic reconciliation must be central to the clean energy transition by removing barriers to accessing the financial capital, ownership, and other project benefits. To sum that all up, renewable energy is a proven and cheap form of energy generation. As stated by the David Suzuki Foundation, government, utilities, businesses, and households need to prioritize energy efficiency and conservation, since in many cases the cheapest source of energy is the energy saved through efficiency. Do you travel by plane each year for vacation? You might want to consider a staycation. Flying is actually the most damaging way to travel for the climate. Aviation contributes to 2.4% of the global CO2 emissions. The aviation industry as a whole is responsible for approximately 5% of global warming. That's a pretty significant amount. Emissions from planes increased by 32% between 2013 and 2018. Choosing alternative ways of traveling is the most effective way to reduce the carbon footprint travel can have. If you absolutely have to fly, it is much more climate friendly to fly economy opposed to business or first class. Speaking of transportation, let's talk about electric vehicles. How green are they actually? The batteries that power electric vehicles require minerals including lithium, cobalt, manganese, and nickel, all of which have to be mined. These minerals aren't an endless resource, and as stated by Fengji Yu, and I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right, so I apologize if I'm not, a professor at the Department of Engineering at Cornell University, can the supply match the demand or not? If we cannot match the demand, that means we are going to face some bottlenecks, which is very true. If we run out of minerals, it's going to be really hard to keep producing batteries at the rate we need. Electric motors are great for individuals, but overall not very an efficient use of resources for heavy-duty vehicles. These heavy-duty vehicles could benefit more from other forms of decarbonization, like hydrogen fuel cells and biofuels. Therefore, using electric motors in light to medium-duty vehicles will reduce more CO2 emissions overall while using fewer mineral resources. Another way to curb your carbon footprint: retrofit your home with clean energy technologies. To learn more about this topic, let's call up my old neighbor Doug, who used to live across the street from me. Welcome to the podcast, Doug. Thank you for being here. Could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your job as a home energy advice consultant?
Sure. So my name is Doug Horn. I'm presently living in the Comox Valley, and I'm an energy expert is the actual title with City Green Solutions. Yeah, the City Green Solutions is an organization that's been around for, 16, 17 years, and they get involved in a lot of energy efficiency projects, generally for residential buildings. So they have a lot of experience in the sort of the whole world of energy efficiency, rebates, energy audits, all sorts of things. And what they saw there was a bit of a hurdle for homeowners, because homeowners would, they'd hear about a heat pump, they'd hear about rebates, they'd hear about different programs, they'd start looking into them. And a lot of times what the homeowners would just get really confused as to what's the difference between all these programs, what's the difference between a heat pump and an air conditioner. And so a lot of times they wouldn't even bother taking the next step. City Green went to the province, and they have a good relationship with the province, said, hey, we want to start up this program to give residents, homeowners, a 1-hour free consultation just to give them enough information to get them moving down that path, know what their next steps are. So the province thought it was a great idea, and they said, okay, we'll team up with various municipalities who also want to put some money in to pay for this program. So the Capital Regional District on the island, the City of Vancouver, all the North Shore municipalities, and anybody who is a Van City member, those organizations all contribute to the program. So anybody within those municipalities or a member of Van City gets to make use of this program. And literally what they're doing is they're submitting a registration form, which is just really asking them questions. What are your concerns? What are your goals? What are your motivations? So they provide a lot of information. Energy experts like myself, we take that information, do a little research on the home, and then have a 1-hour conversation with the homeowner to sort of refine exactly what they're looking for, explain a bunch of things to them, i.e. about insulation, why would we bother insulating more in the attic, things like that, talk about heat pumps. And then we take all that information and we put it into a fairly simple 2-page report to send the homeowners, which really then gives them, I look at it like this. When I give them the report, it's like, if this was my house, these are the things I would look at. Say I've spoken to almost 350 homeowners so far, and almost all of them are very grateful for the program. They feel they walk away with a lot more clarity about, okay, now we got a better feeling as to what we're going to do.
So you had solar panels on your house in North Van at least 13 years ago, at least when we moved in, they were there. When did you install them and why did you install them?
I installed them in June of 2006. I was sort of just starting to get my feet wet in the energy conservation world. And for some reason, I think just because I'm a bit of a geek, I guess, I don't know, I sort of focused on the energy aspect. Maybe it was just something easy for me to comprehend. I don't know. It just seemed like a good area to explore. I'm a very hands-on person. I need to sort of actually see it, feel it, work with it to understand it. And at the time, I was looking at putting them on, but BC Hydro did not have the ability to do interconnection agreements yet. So it was only in 2006, like the spring of 2006, that BC Hydro finally came out and said that you can get a net metering agreement and put solar panels in your house. So I think I was one of the first, if not the first person to apply to for this program. You know, literally I just sent in the schematics. This is what I'm going to put on my house. This is what it's going to produce. BC Hydro came back and said, yeah, seems good. Just make sure you get it inspected and send us the inspection report. And that was about as simple as what from a BC Hydro's perspective.
Nice when it's simple.
Yeah.
And did the solar panels cost a lot, or how much did they cost to have them installed? And
yeah, I was going to do it myself initially, and I was pretty confident. I already had the schematic. I had done a lot of research, and there was a magazine I subscribed to called Home Power. People wrote all sorts of articles in there about doing exactly what I wanted to do. So getting the schematics, knowing all the bits and pieces, that wasn't difficult to figure out. But then just as I was about to do it, I ran into some people who work for a nonprofit organization called Vancouver Renewable Energy Co-op. And they were very interested because, again, the net metering agreement had just started. So they were very keen on getting involved in projects like mine. So I worked with them. You know, it really didn't make that much of a difference from an overall cost. And they helped me install it. So the nice thing was they had an electrician on staff. So that was my one concern. I could do the electrical work, but was I going to do it well enough that the inspector would, you know, pass? So I got them involved. They had an electrician on board. It went in super easy. The cost of the system then was, it was just over 1,000 watts, and it cost just about $14,000. So it was about $140 a watt to get that. $14 a watt to get that installed.
Awesome. And do you know if it would be more or less expensive today? Because I've heard that like
way
sustainable
less.
stuff is way less.
I would say, depending upon exactly, you know, everything, I would say you'd be paying probably about, I'd say less than $7 a watt now. So you probably, that same system, if you got it installed today, it would probably be way less than half. I'd say you might even be getting it down around $5 a watt to get it installed.
Right.
Not the first.
Yeah, and so then that kind of leads into the next question is, do we save energy costs by having solar panels? And I know you said that people aren't always doing it for financial purposes, but does it lower the cost?
For sure. And, you know, it doesn't really matter how much electricity you use. The amount of energy you're going to generate is based upon the size of the solar panels you can put on your house. And in a simple way it works is anything that the solar panels are producing that you're not using at that moment in time get fed back into the grid. And BC Hydro, with their smart meters, they measure electricity coming into the house and electricity going out of the house. Mm-hmm. So it sort of just works like if you're putting energy into the grid, electricity into the grid, they just keep track of that. And then what will eventually happen is in the summer months, you may be producing more than you're using, so you'll sort of bank a credit. But in the winter months, you're definitely going to be using more than you're creating, so then you'll just start taking out of that. So in my house, I was able to produce slightly more electricity over the year than I used. So what would happen in the summer is I would be buffering, I would be banking, and then in the fall time, I would start taking away from it. And then at the end of my fiscal year with BC Hydro, they would usually then just credit me anything left over, which we're talking like $10 kind of thing.
Right. Okay.
So it definitely was going to reduce your energy costs. And like I said, typically it's probably going to take maybe as little as 8, maybe as many as 12 years to pay it off, depending upon other factors.
And then in terms of climate change, how effective are solar panels to help mitigate climate change?
Well, like I said, I mean, I think the thing is that there was this, or is this saying in the energy conservation world, the first thing you do is you reduce your waste. So really you need to look around, you know, if we're talking about residential homes, it's figuring out where are we wasting energy and what can we do to stop that wasting. And that really applies for anything. You know, anytime you're using energy, it's like, what can you do to minimize? So, you know, in the simple terms, if you have lights, it's like, well, if we turn the lights off and we're not needing them, then we're reducing our wastage because that's waste. Okay. So then once you go through and you reduce as much of your wastage, so that's more of an operational aspect, primarily. Once you've done that, you know, smart thermostat, stuff like that. Once you've reduced your wastage, then you look at putting more efficient. So sorry, maybe I'll step back. Reducing wastage would also be putting more insulation in the attic, putting better windows on the house, reducing air leakage, because that's all just wasted heat. Once you reduce your wastage, then the next step is to put more efficient systems in. So if you put more attic insulation, you've replaced all your windows, and you have an old mid-efficiency furnace, then going into a heat pump or to a high-efficiency furnace, there now you're putting in a more efficient system. Once you've done all that, then anything else that you want to do, that's when you start incorporating renewables. And that's really, it makes the most sense to do it in that sequence. So if you've gone through that process and you're installing solar panels, that's great, because that means you've already done all that other work. And probably all that other work is going to have a much bigger impact on climate change than just putting solar panels on. You know, and unfortunately, some people just like the look of solar panels. So to me, if you don't reduce your wastage and put more efficient systems in and just throw solar panels on there, I don't think it's really that good of a thing.
Right. Okay. And then moving on from solar panels, I've heard a lot about heat pumps being recommended to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from buildings, and I'm not entirely really sure what they are. So could you tell me a bit about what heat pumps are and how they work?
Yeah. So the thing about heat pumps is it comes down to efficiency. They're very efficient, and we'll talk about efficiencies in a minute, which means they're using less energy, which means they're going to create less greenhouse gas emissions, and they're using a cleaner form of energy compared to natural gas, so you're also greatly reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Now, the big thing about heat pumps is, unlike most conventional heating systems, so whether it's a furnace or a boiler or electric baseboards or any sort of electric resistance heat, they are generating heat. They're taking energy, natural gas or electricity, and they're generating heat. They combust natural gas to generate heat. They put a big resistance in the electrical circuit to generate heat. So the thing is when you're really converting that energy into heat. And when you're converting energy into heat, you're never going to get more than 100%. You're never going to be able to convert and get more heat out of the energy than it can potentially hold. So with natural gas appliances, The new ones of today, you can get 96, 97% efficient, pretty close. Pretty close to 100%. Electric resistance type heating is actually 100% efficient. All the energy that goes in is converted to heat. So the big difference with a heat pump is not generating electricity. A heat pump is not generating heat. It is moving heat. So it's moving heat. It's taking heat from the outdoor air and it's moving it inside. Or they also work in reverse. They take heat from inside and they move it outside. So that process of moving heat as opposed to generating heat is where it gains its efficiency. So in our climate, in our part of the world, over our heating season, we consider a heat pump about 250% efficient.
Oh, wow.
So for every 1 unit of energy that you put into a high efficiency natural gas furnace, you get 97% of that unit as heat. For every unit of energy you put into an electric baseboard, you get 1 unit of heat. For every unit of energy you put into a heat pump, you get 2.5 units of heat on average over the course of the year. So what you can say is a heat pump is going to be about 2.5 times more efficient than the most efficient natural gas furnace or boiler, and about 2.5 times as efficient as any electric resistance heating. So that's where they gain efficiency, is because they're moving heat. And there is heat in air. I mean, you can get cold climate heat pumps that can pull heat out of air down to like minus 20 degrees.
Oh, wow.
So there's still heat in the air, and the process of moving it with the heat pump. Now, the thing is everybody already has a heat pump in their house. It's their refrigerator. It works on the exact same principles. It's been around for a long time. So that's really the big things about heat pumps. Use a lot less energy, using a cleaner form of energy, electricity, and they can run both in one direction to bring heat from outside in, and the other direction from moving heat from inside out. So all air conditioners, well, I wouldn't say all, pretty well all air conditioners are heat pumps. They're basically the same thing. Except for probably, I would say the air conditioner, if somebody calls it an air conditioner, it's probably a heat pump that only runs in one direction.
Right. At that point, you might as well just get a heat pump that goes both directions.
Well, nowadays for sure. But, a lot depends. I mean, while heat pumps are great, and I love heat pumps, they may not work in every single household. Because the one thing about heat pumps is heat pumps are grabbing small little bits of heat from the outdoor air and bringing them in continuously. So your best bet, the best houses for a heat pump are houses that are very energy efficient, that aren't losing a lot of heat. So any new build has a much better opportunity for a heat pump. If you've got an old 1912 house with maybe doesn't have insulation in the walls, maybe doesn't have an attic, maybe it's got really old windows, heat pump, it's the size of the system that you would need to bring in to compensate for the heat loss in that house, it's probably not going to work.
Okay. Yeah, so that brings us to the question of, similar to the solar panel question, is whether or not they're worth the time and money to install.
They are, and I mean, this is the process I go through with every homeowner, is we always talk about the envelope of the house first. What can you do to the envelope? Attic insulation, best bang for your buck. It's generally the only place in a house that you have the ability to put more insulation in. And it makes a huge difference because it slows, heat rises, so it's slowing the heat leaving the home. And in the summertime, it's slowing the heat come into the house. So we like to look at attic insulation, see if we can do something there. We like to look at wall insulation. Typically, you're not going to be able to do a lot at the wall level unless it's an older home and it doesn't have insulation. And then we look at the windows, which kind of work very closely with air leakage, because chances are if your house leaks a lot of air, then probably your windows are the biggest culprit. So if you replace your windows, you're probably also going to reduce your air leakage. Now, if you're able to do some things to that house to make it more energy efficient, then you have a much better opportunity to put a heat pump in. I would just never just put a heat pump into a house without going through that other process first, because you may not be happy.
Do you have any other final thoughts on renewable energy or climate change that you'd like to share?
I think renewable energy is a good thing. Again, do all that other stuff first. When I moved up here, I was going to put solar panels on my house, but I don't live in the best area for it. And being a building science person, I'm not always convinced that putting solar panels on a roof of a house is the best option. It's what most people have because they don't have land. So all I'm going to tell you is that there's organizations that you can purchase the green energy from. So I pay about $22 a month to a company called Bullfrog Power. And what they do is I tell them how much energy my house uses. For $22 a month, they guarantee me that same amount of energy is being generated by a renewable energy project somewhere in the province.
Oh, that's pretty cool, actually.
So I think for the end result of getting renewable energy on the grid, I think it's even a better way because they're going to be more efficient at their projects. They're going to put solar panels in an area where they're going to get much more sun than me. They're going to be able to do things at a bigger scale. They're going to be able to incorporate run-of-the-river, wind, solar panels. So they're going to be able to, because I think the big thing about renewable energy is the more that we can be producing it on a constant rate, the easier it is to infiltrate it with the grid. So I don't know. I'm really big on companies that do that. I think it's a good way to go.
Yeah, I actually have never heard of that before, so I'm going to have to look into that after this. I'm really curious. Yeah. All right, and I got one more general question I've been asking everyone on the podcast that I've interviewed so far. Is there anything you've personally been doing lately to be sustainable or help mitigate climate change?
Yeah, for me, I think it's again is looking at I just look at my lifestyle and I just try and remove the waste. That's the big thing. So, and you can use that for anything, taking shorter showers. Do I really need to shower this morning, or is it just a habit I've gotten myself into? Do I really need to drive to the store? Or if I'm going to drive to the store, can I do 2 or 3 things, or can I take my bike? So, it's really interesting. I live rural, so I live on a well. So now all of a sudden, people who live in the city, until they start getting metered for their water, to them, it's just a free resource that they don't really need for. So now I'm living on a well. It's like, and I have a fairly big garden. So one of the last things that I've been doing is I've incorporated a rain harvesting system, and I store about 4,000 liters of water, which is what I use for my garden. And what I've been finding is that by storing 4,000 liters of water, is over the course of a growing season, I don't have to take anything from my well to water my garden. So that just means I'm using my well less, which means I don't have to dig a deeper well, all that type of stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Climate Countdown. So there you have it, the rundown on renewable energy. A huge thank you to Doug for coming on the podcast. I hope you enjoyed learning about green energy and carbon footprint. Have a look at the show notes in the episode description for resources and more info. Please consider subscribing, and thank you for listening to the Climate Countdown.